I mean, it's such a shame. I try to be an optimist, but people stay the same. I know I make that statement as if people never change. It's not even my fault, but why do I feel so ashamed? Hey, is this what they became? Is this how they behave? Break the key off the lock, I snap the lock from the chain. Penny for your thoughts that I don't ever wanna save. The things you entertain, I would have sworn was just a phase. Missing pieces from the puzzle, so I can't complete the maze. Hey, then I change my ways.
Growing up in Alsace River, I was raised by a single mom, and I had two older siblings. Grew up in a home with family, cousins, and aunts. I would say that I grew up in a loving home. However, life took a very bad turn when I started mixing with the wrong crowd at the age about 17. And in 2005, I then got caught up in addiction. So I grew up in Alsace River, attended the local primary school, went to a very well known high school. And 2005, after attending college and getting my qualification as a beauty therapist, I then started mixing with the wrong crowds. And this is where I then got introduced to crystal meth. I didn't realize that everything that was spoken about this drug was actually going to come through in my life. And if I have to look back today, like I still wish at times that I didn't take that first smoke or I wasn't where I found myself on that day. 14 years down the line, crystal meth took 14 years of my life. It was a struggle of trying to get sober and living with life now as an addict. I remember I was using for, I think, at least 3 or 4 years before my family found out that I was using substances. And it so happened that I came back from a weekend away and mom was taking out my dirty laundry when she found my stash in my bag. At the time, I think it was also a God given moment. But, once you're addict and you're caught in these things, you always find a way to just like manipulate and lie yourself out of a situation. And I convinced mom that it was just a weekend thing and that I was just trying and that I would stop. But unfortunately, I didn't stop. And the manipulation and the lying just grew so much more, where my addiction started getting out of control. And even though my family tried to assist me to get clean, like when I eventually now decided, okay, wait, I do not have the hold on this as I thought I would. I managed to stay clean for a while, but after a disappointing relationship, I relapsed, and that relapse spiraled out of control for another 6 years. And I started taking things out of the house. Sometimes being in addiction, we don't want to, or many a times when you tell your story as an addict, we often leave out the harsh parts that we have done during our addiction. And you see how you are fading and you're also seeing the disappointment that is happening in your family, and that you are causing as a person, even though your family know like this is not you, that they are used to. But it just like the addiction just spiraled more and more out of control to the point where I then felt like nobody understands me anymore and nobody cares for me. And I eventually then just left my mom's house. She didn't put me out. I just decided like since they don't get me, I'm just gonna leave. I mean, I would be away from home for days or even weeks on end without not knowing where I would be. And then simply just because of one day she said to me, "This is not a bed and breakfast," and I was like, "How can you tell me that? Like, I'm just coming to wash me and then I'm gonna leave again." Getting all like obstropolous with her, and she just said to me like, "Kijk hoe lyk jy? Like did you even like look at yourself like you just fading? And I think those words made me realize that my mother was seeing me in a different image right now. And that ended up with me leaving, thinking that I was like protecting her from the hurt I was causing her. But in actual fact, what happened next, I didn't realize that I was just creating more hurt in her. So I ended up on the streets, roaming the streets of Peru, between Peru and Goodwood in Voortrekker Road. There I started getting into other kinds of activities, got into prostitution. And from there, I met what I thought was my savior because I knew that life was not for me. The dangers that was involved in being out on the streets as a female was just something that I didn't imagine, but somehow God had his hand upon me. I would hear daily about girls either getting raped or clients picking up girls and not paying them and just chucking them out of the cars. But somehow God just orchestrated things for me that I was always in a kind of a safe space. I'm not trying to glamorize the sex industry because it's not an industry that I would want any woman or any girl for that matter to, whether you are struggling financially to get into. And for me, it was a part of my journey that I also didn't imagine I would go through. Coming from a qualification as a beauty therapist, having a good home, and yeah, I found myself on the streets. And then I met what I thought was my savior. It was a guy I got involved with. He is part of our South African military. And because I was an addict and because I was on the streets, I felt that he was like the best thing to slice bread because who would want to take a woman coming from the streets? Who would want to take a woman that is addicted in substances? However, both of us was addicted. He was also addicted to substances, and the relationship was toxic from the get go. But just the mere fact that I didn't want to be out on the streets, I stayed. I remember 10 days into us dating, he gave me my first smack. And even though I knew mom always said, like, no man should raise his hands to you, I stayed simply because I didn't want to be back on the streets. And it was convenient. I had a home, I had a bed, and there was something to eat, and drugs was available when it needs be. And that relationship continued for 5 years. There was times, yes, when the beatings would stop, but even then, you would still wonder, should the next beating come, how severe it would be. I remember in 2019, I think it was one of the most severe beatings I had endured. Apart from the others, even being stripped naked in the road by him and even going back home. But because I was so stuck, even though my mom helped me when I went back home, I still went back to him. And this is often how people don't understand the cycle of abuse and the psychological impacts thereof, because your abuser makes you believe that you won't get any better than them. And especially when a woman has got a bit of a history, it's very hard to break away from it. So often people ask me, like, why don't you leave him? Why are you still staying? I didn't know the answers then. But clearly there was something in him that I was looking for. And just the mere fact that he would always tell me that you won't get anyone better than me and that I will be the best that you will get. And the list just goes on, the emotional, and the mental manipulation that takes place. And I ended up going back to him and we moved to Simonstown, where I was even more isolated. He would lock me up many a times going to work. I would be at home, get beaten up before he goes to work, having to run around like a mad person because just to get away. Many times oh, I felt like, okay, yeah, maybe I'm the reason or I deserve it. And then there was those times like when I knew, like, but I didn't do anything wrong. And it continued. 2019, I recall one Friday night, he also beat me up so severely that he recorded the phoning the merchant that if the merchant doesn't come now with the drugs, that he would kill me. I had blood running down my face. I had sprained my ankle that night because he threw me with the machete. He just grabbed anything that he could beat me with. And I ran. And I said to myself, I'm not going to stay around, you know, um, to see if this guy's capable of killing me. Yes, the beatings has been quite bad, but this is the first time that it has been to this point where he actually phoned somebody or recorded me showing them how he's beating me. And to me, that was just like totally psychotic. So it told me that, when it comes to this point, he's capable of killing you. And the Saturday morning, I got out. Unfortunately, my sister was sick. She just had a major operation and mom was taking care of her. But also because I was so deep in my addiction, I think mom was scared to get me back home. And it's not that I won't say that she didn't care. I think maybe just she wasn't um, capable of knowing how to deal with me in that state. Herself, as somebody that had an abusive marriage, I think now I realize that maybe my abuse was opening scars for her. And but this allowed me to get into contact with my sister. And she just said to me, like, we need you to take the first step, you know, try and get some help. Unfortunately, after a weekend away from him, I had to go back. I was crashing at a friend and she needed to go to work. And the beating stopped until the 10th of May. 10th of May was when he finally told me how he was planning on killing me. How he was, because we were staying in on one of the naval bases. Obviously, I was illegal because I wasn't married to him. But he told me how he was going to kill me. And I remember that day, he was even accusing me of being involved in some kind of robbery or something to the sort. And I just couldn't figure out how this man was coming up with all these kinds of things. And he said to me, like, he will cut up my body and he will just throw it in one of the dams or just stay in the fields because there's baboons and the baboons will end up eating me and nobody would ever know even that I existed. And I said to myself on that day, I'm not going to stick around to find out if you are capable of doing this. And the last beating before that was constantly playing through my mind. And I eventually ran and I seeked help, and the military police helped me. Obviously, under warning, I had to sign papers that I would never set foot back on the naval base. If I do, they would obviously arrest me for trespassing, etc. I think it was also just a help for me to eventually stay away. And I think some would say, like, yeah, you were sucker for punishment for going back the first time. But there's so many women out there that is stuck in an abusive relationship that doesn't know how to get out. We don't have the resources really that helps women and fully support them to get out of that vicious cycle. And for me, that was my get out. However, the connection was still there. I ended up living in one of the shelters in Simonstown, but he still had access to me. He would see me in the road, and love just, love is blind, as they say, but sometimes love is just stupid and it can kill you. And the very last time I went back, I needed some documents from him. I finally got now a EPW contract and I felt like, oh, I'm on top of the world because now my life is going to change. And it happened that I needed my ID document from him or something I needed, and I needed to get some clothes that were still there. And, there was still a whole lot of process, but because there was still that connection between us. And I ended up going with him to his place, knowing the risk that is involved. All the promises, no, I'll just take you up and we can come down and maybe we can talk, work things out. In his mind, he had already planned that this was the day you were not going to leave. And we got into an argument simply because I didn't want to use drugs with him. And he said to me on that day that if I can't have you, no one will. And I realized that you need to get out of here. And 2 weeks prior to the incident, which was on the 31st of July 2019, I had broken my foot from missing a step at the shelter. So I had my foot in cast. And I remember one of the ladies that I met at the shelter said to me, it's not a good idea for you to go. I think she just knew her name was Destiny. She knew something was going to go down. And I still went. And he beat me up so severely that I had a dislocated shoulder. I think I fractured my knees because it was just so painful. My jaw was skew from the way that he had beaten me up, and he decided that day he was going to set me alight. And he drizzled some diesel over me, but for the life of God, he just couldn't get a lighter. And even though he was smoking at that time, and when he did find the lighter didn't want to strike. And that was my time where I think God just again stepped in and gave me the wisdom to be able to psychologically manipulate him by telling him that it's fine, I will stay, I won't take the job. I just need him to take me down to the shelter so that I can go and get my clothes from the shelter, and I was going to move back in with him. But I knew going back to the shelter, the woman at the shelter was not going to allow me to go back to him in that state. And uit die pil gesluk. He took it and he took me down to the shelter. And the moment I got out of the car, I screamed. He even took my crutch and he beat me with my crutch. So the moment I got out of the car, I screamed for help. And then all the ladies, by the grace of God, just came out running. And I remember there was one specific person. He was a pastor. He is a pastor by the name of Pastor Sherry, and they called him because I needed to go to hospital. And Destiny called him and he said, Pastor, he beat her up again. And he asked her to give me the phone. And that day, I think, was when I realized my worth. And all that he said to me was, I need to tell you that it's not your fault. You are not the reason for his actions. And that gave me hope for a better future. Even though things didn't go easy, the addiction was still a bit of a struggle. And I even ended up homeless again after that, moving from the shelter because I relapsed. And then moving from the shelter, moving from pillar to post, and then eventually losing my job. I resigned because I was more out of work than what I was at work. And also, I think I was ashamed of how I looked, trying to hide the fact that I'm actually homeless, and then having to get to work so that I can wash myself in the bathrooms before anybody else come. But I'm sure because there was a specific lady, Auntie Berenice, that said to me, "No man, maak veel lekker. You can't look like this." And trying to hide the fact that I'm technically homeless. Eventually I just resigned. Ended up homeless, again back to prostitution, trying to survive, doing like car guarding and stuff like that. And somehow God just brought in COVID in that time, and my life was never the same. We were about 60 that was on the streets in Simonstown, and Pastor Sherry, along with the counselor, Mr. Carlisle, Wilcock or something is his surname, but I know it was Counselor Simon at the time. They and the community of Simonstown took care of us. Like even the day before COVID hit, I was standing on the streets of Simonstown. I was as high as a kite. I was planning to commit suicide that day because what am I going to do? I'm on the streets. I don't have my family with me. There's no way you're going to be able to scuttle.
So in this room, we just been dedicated to the victims of gender-based violence, which is quite a big issue we have on the Cape Flats. Gender-based violence, it's the harm of innocent people, people that like a Tesney van Wyk, Aisha Callis, Reina Roman, all these young ladies and young men either got killed either by a family member or somebody that they knew. And also one of the things is we have young men here that died because of gang violence where they were playing in the park, they were playing in the yard, and so what happened was a stray bullet caught them and they lost their life. And that's also part of the everyday life on the Cape Flats because you know what people don't know how to treat people. They think it's right if you hurt somebody. And that's one of the issues we need to talk about. One of the issues we need to unpack. Why is it okay for us to hit or to hurt innocent young ladies or young women, even with men as well? Gender-based violence is quite big on the Cape Flats, and it's something that is growing. And one of the things that I notice is that the perpetrators are always shielded by their friends and family.